All right. Hey, you guys. So this one's actually a little bit different. So I know I've been going around at the conferences that I'm at, but then I realized I had some really brilliant friends who I wanted to get their thoughts on it, and we may or may not cross paths at the conferences. So Philip is joining me today via Zoom. And so Philip, introduce folks to yourself. Where are you based out of? What's your experience level in real estate? Kind of like, what do you do?
Yeah, Philip Klinck. I'm in Greenville, South Carolina. Um, my experience level, I guess it would be fairly experienced. I'm an exchanger, so we do a lot of different sort of things with real estate. Don't deal with banks, but deal with a lot of debt and lease options back and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's funny that I'm talking about the rentals because I really don't keep rentals. But this works for anything that you're doing.
Yeah, look, absolutely. So for guys, a lot of you have listened to the podcast episode that I did with Philip, which is, I really consider it like an exchanging one-on-one kind of conversation. So if you're like, hey, what is an exchanger? If you don't know, go listen to the episode. That'll get you introduced. I always say like exchanging is creative finance on steroids. And if folks consider themselves creative investors, but they don't know what exchanging is, they're missing out. So without that, moving on from that, let's go ahead. But that's a great basis though, because exchanging is going to give you as an exchanger, identifying as an exchanger is going to give you a unique perspective. I already know. So give me your thoughts on debt or no debt. Yes, we talk about rentals, but you sell stuff on financing, different things like that. So what are your thoughts around the topic of debt or no debt?
Debt's fantastic. It's a tool. It's a leverage tool. Um, and in my opinion, I think you should either have as much debt as you can get on a property or none. And the reason for that is if you've got tons and tons of debt on a property, you and the lender have the same problem if a problem arises. So you
Mhm.
now have a partner that you can work with on whatever the issue is. If you have no debt on it, it's a lot easier for you to deal with the problem on your own. In the middle is where people get in trouble, especially with banks. I don't deal with banks, but if you're 50% leveraged and something happens, you lose your tenant and you're out of cash and the bank's calling the loan due because you have to get it redone every 5 years, you're in a bad spot as far as your equity goes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the dangerous position to be in. Whereas if it was free and clear, there is no bank. You just lose your tenant, you lose your income. But oh well, I'll just go wait until I find another tenant. If you got
So
tons of
you're speaking, not to cut you off here, but you're speaking to like commercial loans, right? And maybe or maybe not commercial properties, right? So like, because like those are the ones that have the arms that they're going to adjust the rate every 5 years and stuff like that, right?
even just regular people that have a big payment. You've got a payment, you've got escrow, you've got to pay the HOA, you've got all these expenses. And as long as you've got a tenant in there, there's no problems. But
Right.
as soon as your tenant leaves and you've got to pay that $5,000 a month worth of expenses, because you've got to pay the water and power and everything at that point, that's a big burden on somebody that maybe can't handle that, negative cash flow until they find another tenant, especially if
Right.
they mess it up. Because then you got to fix it up and pay the
Right.
payments and wait.
Look, absolutely. So I think that's a unique perspective. It's either have a lot and meaning that your equity position is low. And so therefore, if the bank were to take it back, I mean, they'd be taking back something that they have,
They won't want to.
yeah, they wouldn't want to at that point
Mm.
versus if you, so obviously no debt, that the risk there is different.
Yep.
But then if you have that medium position, that's an interesting perspective. What else do you have? What else thoughts do you have?
Yeah. So I don't, like I said, I don't keep a lot of rentals, so my expenses are fairly low, um, or none essentially on the ones that are free and clear. So I've
Mhm.
got that entire payment is coming in as my cash flow. So if on the other side of my balance sheet something goes bad, I've still got a lot of net cash flow. And I see that a lot with people that have landlords, people that are building up a big portfolio of properties and they've got to have debt in order to get there. Well, if you've got everything 50% levered and yeah, well, we were just talking about it, that a hurricane comes through and all the power goes out and people move or something happens to half of your portfolio, you are already making almost no cash flow. Now you're making negative cash flow on this giant portfolio that has tons of equity in it, and you could lose it all.
And I think that's interesting because a lot of people, They think it's almost, they think in extremes. They either want to be paid off, they want to be, or leveraged to the hilt, right? Like you're talking about that part. But then a lot of people feel like, well, I'm safe if I'm in the middle, right? Like there is risk to being free and clear. There's risk to having, almost no equity, right? Fully leveraged.
Mhm.
But people don't address this risk in the middle, as well.
Yeah, in the mid, it might seem like it's safe because I put 50% down and I got tons of equity. Well, how do you access that equity in times of need?
Right.
It's, maybe you can go get a line of credit from a bank, or
Right.
maybe, but that's just a very difficult thing to access. If well, I would rather have one that's totally leveraged and one that's free and clear.
Yeah.
Because if I have a problem, I can just go borrow against the free and clear one. That should be easy.
Right. And that's almost a safer position than having two that are 50-50, right? So
Absolutely.
one that's, fully leveraged, one that's free and clear.
Hmm.
And that's something that's I think an interesting thought, because you can take those positions where you can kind of take some chips off the table with that free and clear one, right?
Hmm.
But it also gives you a position that you can take in the event that, something happens.
And another thing is constants. So um, when you
Don't
have
worry, Pete's been on here sharing his thoughts, so this is not the first time they've heard constant. So go ahead and keep going.
Yeah, so if you've got 4 or 5 little houses that have a little bit of debt on them, but they've got these high constants from when you originally got the loans, you could be in a bad position. You could be in a bad cash flow position, but have tons and tons of equity. And one of the things that Jack Miller said one time is either he or somebody else had a bunch of houses with low debt on them, and what he did was he piled all that debt onto one house and raised the rate. So he went from having whatever it was, 5% rate on a bunch of little loans with pretty high constants to one big payment with a higher rate on one house. Well, what did he do with that house? He just let somebody take over the payments. There's no equity left anyway. Now I free and cleared all my other stuff and my cash flow goes through the roof.
Right. If you could explain loan constants in an easy way, do you think you could do that?
Yeah, it's just your payment over the year divided by what's left on the balance. So like if you've got a $10,000 balance, but your payment's still $1,000 a month, your loan constant is insane.
Right. Because people don't realize that your payment was based off of the original purchasing power, like whatever you were
Yeah,
getting the loan for, and it stays the same all the way to the end. Even though your balance shrinks, that payment's still based off of that original one. And
yeah,
yes, more is going toward principal, less is going toward interest over time, which a lot of people emphasize that. But there's a level there that you why do you think a loan constant is important? Everyone who is sophisticated in my life speaks in loan constants, and I think a lot of people don't get introduced to it in real estate.
yeah. We don't pay off the highest rate stuff first. We pay off the highest loan constant first because of what it feels like. It feels like you're paying a higher rate because you're paying this giant payment compared to what you could pay off. So let's say we've got $1,000 a month payment on $100,000 loan, and that feels like about 12% to us. I know it's not. The rate might only be 5%. But if I know I can get rid of a $12,000 a year cost, and I'm thinking about making an investment that might make me 12% on my money, I might just go ahead and pay off the $100,000 because I know that $1,000 is gone now. I don't have to pay that anymore.
Yeah, I get that. No, and I think this is important. I think this is something where, especially if folks are like thinking towards what to pay off, so many people, again, they go say, okay, well, what's my highest interest rate, or things like that. But this is just another perspective on how to look at it. And that loan constants really speaks to, really that monthly payment comparative to debt versus just the cost of that debt interest wise.
Yeah.
Um, so I love that. Any final thoughts as we wrap up here?
Well, the interesting thing is the person that you post or that posted or you posted on Facebook was they were talking about the what would you do? And in my opinion, I don't want to use banks ever. So I would go create a note against stuff that I own at 100 cents on the dollar, 120 cents on the dollar, as long as the my income on that property can cover the debt and go buy something with that note. That's how I create debt on my properties. So I want real
So
people.
you're creating it with real people. That note would be with a person,
Yeah, a seller,
um, a
somebody that
seller.
selling their property. So if she was asking about flipping a house. Okay, what do you do when you flip the house? Do you keep it? Do you keep this many a year or whatever it was?
Yes,
Well,
that's
I
right.
would only keep it if I knew that the next person that wants to sell their bad house, if they would take a note against it.
Yeah.
And then that's when I would keep it because then I get to create my own payment and terms and no balloon or whatever the terms were with the seller.
Well, and I think that's the beauty of creative finance. So many people say, "Oh, you guys in the creative finance world, you make things so complicated. I'd rather just go to a bank. It's I at least know what, it fits in a box of what I need to do." But then they
Yeah,
don't realize that you can create so much more by having these skills.
yeah.
And really in essence, it becomes where anything and everyone can become a bank at that point versus just, the bankers who and like you and you fit their criteria.
Well, and go apply for a loan and tell me how easy it is. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not that you just walk in and they give it to you.
Sure. Yeah,
Whereas
people are picking their heart. Yeah.
Whereas with a seller, if I go sit down with a seller and they've got a couple $100,000 in equity, and I say, well, look, you've got a couple 100,000 in equity and 100,000 bank loan, you're in second position and you're losing money. I can give you a first position note against my nice, pretty, just redone, free and clear house, and I'll pay off your debt or I'll take it over, whatever. And under these terms, so you'll go from negative $1,000 a month to positive $1,000 a month, a $2,000 a month swing. It's real easy for people to say yes to that.
And I think that's the beauty again of understanding, especially some of these um more advanced finance strategies. They're not really advanced, it's just people get so stuck on subject to and seller finance and maybe a lease option as
Mm.
well, okay, I do creative finance. I'm like, hey, there's so much more to the world, like keep coming further into the world of creative financing. And then especially in the world of exchanging things go and your skills really get amplified at that point. So I love it.
Mhm.
I think that this is again a great perspective with it because a lot of people see debt. I mean, really most people when they think debt, they think a bank loan, right?
Yeah.
It could be a lot of things, right? And so I
Yeah.
appreciate your
It's
perspectives on it.
yeah, it's I see debt as only with people. And I learned that from Pete and Jack and all those guys. So I didn't make any of this up.
Sure. Well, in that way, it really becomes so much more flexible than the inflexible rate and term sheet they give you, right? That they say like, hey, basically this is what, it becomes one-sided with
Yep.
them. And that, hey, this is what we can do, this is, what we're asking, and you don't really get a say in that other than either yes, you'll do it or no, right? And
That's right.
so what we're saying is by operating with people, private money lenders, sellers, financial friends, at the end of the day what we're saying is we want more control of the deal and to be able to make it to where it's two-sided.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
I love it. Well, appreciate you giving your thoughts today on the role of debt as an investor for you. So
Yeah.
I definitely appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Good talking to you.